The Gipper and the Fibber? Today, Fox on top of an over-the-top rewrite of history, and we simply couldn't let this go. And just as we have every single time this comes up, time to once again slap this nonsense down, hopefully once and for all. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and the White House today continuing its push for hiking taxes on the rich, and lately using Ronald Reagan to make the case.
So I'm not the first president to call for this idea that everybody's got to do their fair share. We could call it the Reagan rule instead of the Buffett rule. It is lower than you would have been paying under Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, who, as I recall, is not accused of being a tax and spend socialist.
If Congress would pass it, we would rename it the Reagan rule tomorrow.
Okay. They don't call me Fox's nerd for nothing. I remember this well. I covered this at the time. I know my financial history. Is the White House taking the Gipper out of context? We play, you decide.
We want to cut taxes, not opportunity. As you can see, the percentage of income tax owed would come down, way down, for those earning less than $15,000. Down for earnings between $15,000 and $30,000. Down for earnings between $30,000 and $50,000, and down for those earning more than $50,000. By lowering everyone's tax rates all the way up the income scale, each of us will have a greater incentive to climb higher, to excel, to help America grow.
By lowering everybody's taxes. So is this president taking liberties quoting that president? Today's fact-checking Washington Post seems to think so, awarding President Obama 2 Pinocchios, indicating significant omissions and or exaggerations. Now, I'm quoting the Washington Post here. On a superficial level, Obama is echoing Reagan's anecdotes when he speaks of the Buffett rule and tax fairness. But it is misleading for Obama to suggest that Reagan was pushing for the same concept and to label the Buffett rule the Reagan rule when the former president actually barnstormed the country to argue on behalf of a broad-based tax cut that reduced taxes for the wealthy, the middle class, and the poor, while greatly simplifying the tax system. First off, I want to be very, very clear here. That is a quote from the Washington Post. This is an issue of which I'm very familiar because as a young enterprising reporter for public television on the Nightly Business Report, I followed that president around the country as he was doing that barnstorming. So this is not a right or left issue for me. This is a right or wrong issue for me. And the president is simply wrong to even imply that President Reagan was for hiking taxes on the rich so that they could pay more. What Ronald Reagan was advocating was getting rid of all the silly loopholes and the credits and the special tax breaks that prevented so many from not paying any taxes at all. Ronald Reagan said time and again, skin in the game, everyone, skin in the game. Big difference, big deal. And a constitutional scholar and former Reagan staffer and best-selling author, Mark Levin, it's something else. It's a big lie. Mark, what do you make of this?
Obama's the anti-Reagan. Now, Ronald Reagan never did and never would raise taxes in the middle of a recession. He slashed personal income taxes, including the top rate, to 28%. Obama wants to raise it to almost 40%. He slashed corporate income taxes, which are the highest in the world under Obama. He slashed capital gains taxes, which Obama wants to double under this phony Buffett rule, which I call the idiot rule. Now, this Buffett rule, if I may, is named after a man who's worth $45 billion, and he intends to build a populist argument around the second richest man in the United States, who the IRS claims owes about half $500 million in taxes and penalties through one of his companies. But here's the thing. The Buffett rule would raise about $5 billion a year. One author explained that it would take 3,000 years then at $5 billion a year to cover the debt. Obama blows $5 billion a year times 10 on phony green jobs and bundler companies. And this isn't about fairness because let's be clear about what Obama does. People in the private sector who are successful, whomever they are, under this president, they're second-class citizens. Apparently, the only noble citizen is a bureaucrat, a politician, or somebody on the dole. All the rest of us are stealing, are ripping people off, are too rich. And so Obama's anti-growth, anti-jobs, anti-wealth, and
Mark,
the record speaks for itself.
It's more than that. What bothers me most about this, maybe because, as I said, I'm Fox's resident nerd. I cover this sort of stuff. I did cover Ronald Reagan and the tax revolution closely. I guess that bespeaks both my age and my nerdiness and how long track it is. But one of the things that I cannot stress enough to folks is this is not a right or left issue to me. This is a right or wrong issue, that Ronald Reagan was trying to address the idea that everyone has skin in the game, and that if you were either very poor and trying to dodge taxes, or you were very rich and trying to dodge taxes, there should be nothing in our tax code that would allow that to happen. And that's what he wanted to eradicate in 1985 and 1986. Now, I think it is worth pointing out that this president has not pointed out that, talking about putting more skin in the game, half the filers in this country aren't filing at all because they don't owe any federal income taxes at all. That's not to dismiss what they're paying in Social Security and Medicare-related taxes. I'm not minimizing maybe the vast majority of them being wonderful Americans. I am saying that half the eligible filers in this country are not paying any federal income taxes in this country, yet the president has twisted this around to make it like a modern-day Ronald Reagan insult, and that's what's insulting.
Well, that's all correct, and the reason he's doing all this is he has to throw out 1,000 phony issues out there in order to take attention off his record. Unemployment is a disaster. It's not coming down. 0.1% is meaningless. Despite all the spending, the debt is completely out of control, and it's going to be out of control for the next 2 decades if this president's reelected. The value of the dollar, we see inflation starting to pick up now, and the value of the dollar, anybody who goes overseas, I'm not one of them, but anybody who does can attest to that. Housing prices are still flat, if not going down. Gasoline prices are going up. Food prices are going up. Neil, what's supposed to go up is going down. What's supposed to go down is going up. And now he wants us to believe he's Ronald Reagan.
Well, I want you to go back in the past, and you knew him better than I did, and you worked with the guy, and you knew the guy very well. If this sounds like Barack Obama to you today, listen to what Ronald Reagan was saying, again, close to 30 years ago. This is from Ronald Reagan.
When taxes are lowered, economic growth follows. And economic growth is good for just about everyone. No one, or just about no one, is saying we ought to raise taxes and take more of the people's money. Actually, I think it'd be fun if some politician would say that. I haven't seen anyone run out of town on a rail in years.
But now we have a president who is saying that.
There's another thing Reagan has that Obama doesn't have, and that's a sense of humor and other things I won't mention on your program. But in any event, the idea that the most left-wing president in my lifetime who wants to fundamentally transform America for all the wrong reasons invokes Ronald Reagan. I mean, how stupid does the president think we are? I have news for him. We're not that stupid.
I don't know, though, because no one's calling him on it. And I'm trying to, when this first started happening, I would raise it on this fine network and on Fox Business, which, Mark, if you don't get, you really should demand.
I do get it.
Excellent. And one of the things I mentioned, I've heard you talk about it extensively on your show, and of course you've written so many great books on this same subject. The issue is that we hear it and the mainstream media isn't even challenging or taking up on it. Again, this is not a conservative liberal point with me. This is a nerdy, let's be right on the money about this kind of point. And I think when you can tell a little lie, you are more prone to tell bigger ones if you haven't already. That's my fear.
Well, you're quite right. Look, the bottom line is this. Obama wants to massively increase taxes. Reagan wanted to massively cut taxes. It's even more than that. If you look at oil and gas, Reagan comes in office. The first thing he does is deregulate oil and gas. First thing he does. Obama is regulating the hell out of them. He's the anti-Reagan. He's the anti-capitalist, if you will. Obama has no intention of cutting anybody's taxes, period. Not the middle class, not the lower class, not any class. He can't. He's got to devour as much as the private sector as possible, which causes me to return to my first point. He views people in the private sector, whatever they earn, whomever they are, whether they're women or men, as second-class citizens. Politicians, bureaucrats, people who feed off the federal government, those are the people he wants to feed. Those are the people he is concerned about. Reagan wanted less of those people. He had to fight Congress. Sometimes he won, sometimes he lost. But he's the anti-Reagan. There's no question about that.
But here's where I worry, and I want to bring this to your attention, Mark. Of course, you follow these markets better than most anyway. But we had a big run-up in the Dow today, about 182 points, closing in back on 13,000, largely fueled by growing optimism Europe's going to get some help. In other words, there's going to be either another bailout or there's going to be another support. And it's this twisted philosophy of bailouts and help buoying the bastion of capitalism. That's what it takes to get these markets moving. I think would have Ronald Reagan rolling in his grave, don't you? What these markets tend to respond to more often than not is if times get tough, well, hopefully the government's going to be there as a backstop, either here or abroad, to bail them out. I think that's just the wrong signal.
No,
you know?
You're quite right. You remember when Reagan came in office, we had massive inflation, double-digit inflation, double-digit unemployment. And he, through fiscal policy, and Volcker, through monetary policy, decided they needed to wring inflation out of the system. They were going to bite the bullet, regardless of the election consequences a few years later. That's exactly what they did. They did whip inflation, massive economic growth. The private sector was unleashed through fiscal and monetary policy. The exact opposite is happening now. The president has his foot on the throat of free enterprise. He's constantly demeaning it. The Fed, I don't know what the Fed is doing. The Fed is printing money left and right. That money will return home one day, and it'll be worth a hell of a lot less. This Fed, this president are going in exactly the opposite direction as Reagan did. Reagan had 25 years of economic growth during and after he left office. We can't even get serious economic growth on the GDP for 1 quarter under this president.
It's amazing. Well, Mark, thank you very, very much. It's always great having you.
It's a great pleasure, my friend.
Excellent writer, great thinker, great lawyer, good friend, Mark Levin. Again, before I tease this, I just want you to be aware, I have no agenda here. I know people are going to say, oh, no. I had an agenda with President Bush, if you want to say that, going with these rescues and bailouts. I was against them then. I was against his not putting the Iraq and Afghanistan wars on budget. I was all for the wars and what he was trying to do, but against not keeping tab of how they were being paid for. So I'm a nerd about this, and I apologize if I'm a nerd, but I take no exception here to anyone who liberally then redoes history to suit either a political environment or an agenda. The fact of the matter is Ronald Reagan was in for simplifying our tax code, not complicating it. He was in for everyone being in the game, everyone paying taxes. No matter where you were in the economic strata, you were paying in. So when he was trying to get rid of those loopholes and special tax credits, he was doing it to address anyone of any income level from trying to dodge paying any money at all. He found that egregious. He found that offensive. He found that sinful. That was Ronald Reagan. That is what he said and did. And I can tell you, as a reporter who followed him around the country on this revolutionary story, when I was a lot thinner and able to, that is what happened.